next session, we're going to be hearing from some real data skills trailblazers in a discussion led by ODI's Business Development Director, Stuart Coleman. It's all yours, Stuart.
Thank you very much, Maggie, and thank you everyone for joining us here in the UK at this late hour. But I know we've got people from 70 plus countries around the world, and we've got feline and canine friends as well. So thank you for having them join with our hosts. I'm delighted to be joined by Volker Buscher, a long-time partner and friend of the Open Data Institute and Chief Data Officer of Arup. And Mayze, also been working with us some time. Di is Global Head of Data and AI at the WPP Group. I'm going to ask Volker and Di to do short introductions to what data literacy means to them and to their organizations. And this session is going to explore what data literacy means to society as a whole. It's not just about businesses, although we've obviously got two business leaders here to discuss it. We all need to go on a journey to explore, grow, and better develop our data skills. And that needs to start right through from primary education and carry through into society as we increasingly are governed and dependent upon decisions made by data that just exists in all our lives. So I'd like to ask Di to just introduce herself, WPP, and really kind of outline what data literacy means in her every day.
Thanks, Stuart, and hi everyone. Well, if you don't know WPP, it's a small organisation with just 100,000 employees. We're in pretty much every market. We're a creative transformation company, and that manifests itself in agencies that specialise in experience, creative, and media. So from a data literacy perspective, it's so broad, and that's why I love my job. But I start with comparing it with general literacy, which is about deriving meaning from words. So to translate that to data literacy, it's deriving meaning from data. And some people would be really quite high expectations with this. And I've seen some definitions that start talking about constructs and analytical techniques, but at WPP we have a spectrum, and I think there should be a spectrum of data skills required. We do not want 100,000 data scientists. I think that would be a disaster for our clients. So we've split our people into almost 3 levels. We've got an AI business school launching next year for some of our most senior execs. We have AI Academy that we launched earlier this year, and that's to upskill 5,000 of our data scientists, and we've partnered with Coursera to roll that out. And the one that we've had a lot of fun with, including partnering with the ODI, is our Demystify AI series, which well, I'm going to sound so old school now. The use case was if you're sat at a dinner party, remember those? If you're sat at a dinner party and someone starts talking about data or AI, I really wanted people not to glaze over and think, God, you're boring, and to have a more articulate conversation than those robots are going to steal all the jobs. So we've done a massive program, including some brilliant data fundamentals work with the ODI. Thank you. We've partnered with a film studio and used blockbuster movies. We've got an AI partner, and we've got AI training our people on AI. So we're really trying to make sure there's something for everybody.
Thanks, Di. That sounds like a lot we can get into. Yeah, I mean, Volker, you've been on a journey as well at Arup, right? Tell us a bit more about what data literacy means for you.
So we are a global consulting business. We got about 16,000 people on all continents. We do anything from designing buildings to designing and planning large infrastructure projects, or providing management or strategic advisory services around built environment policy or city strategies. When I started out as a chief data officer, I had lots of conversations about what we want to do with data and how we want to work with data, both in Arup and externally. And the first thing that struck me was we're not going to build some data tiger team. that puts all the data in one place and has all the expertise to work with it. What we wanted to do is to create the ability to work with data at scale in our businesses wherever it's needed. And that means you need to take I need to take our whole membership with us. And that starts with raising their literacy levels and their knowledge levels to a point where they can work with very sophisticated technologies and methodologies, but also that our business leaders, our board members, our project directors can build it into their day-to-day job, and they don't have to become data scientists or data engineers. So our literacy program this year is based on 3 parts. One is an AI ML master's course that we're running with an academic partner for usually smaller groups or specialists. A data knowledge training that targets all our membership, and that was developed with the ODI to increase basic literacy levels for all staff, and that goes then deeper and deeper depending on how much expertise people want to develop. And digital learning pathways where people build more structured career paths around data and digital capabilities. Next year, I'm looking at what I call a data academy, where we can introduce mentoring and more richer experiences and experimentation for people to develop their own career. The second big piece we're seeing is that once you become a data-enabled organization, you're in an ecosystem. So the value of the data increases the more you can share it. So we need to find common language and common standards with partners and the rest of the industry we work in. And again, that's a question of literacy, but less in terms of professional training, but more in terms of having the language and a common understanding and a common culture of why we want to share data and how we want to work with data.
Thanks, Volker. I think that last point is quite poignant. It builds on some earlier comments from our Chief Strategy Advisor, Jenny Tennyson. She specifically referenced certainly the UK educational journey, where people study language and literature in English up to the age of 16. Why perhaps wouldn't we consider the same kind of approach to data? Just conscious that, you've both represented significant programs of investment. You're both from large organizations, and arguably the chief data officer role is still quite young, certainly in corporates. Di, what do you think? What can smaller organizations do? What could some of the first steps be? If you're listening to this and you don't have a chief data officer, or you're considering that the responsibilities might span different people across the organization, where can we get started on this stuff?
So I do think it starts at the top. I think it starts with the most senior people being open to having a data-led conversation, to be making sure that there's a lot of insights rather than data, that we don't just share thousands and thousands of rows of spreadsheets and expect people to be extracting stuff. So some basic insight skills would be a brilliant starting place. And then culturally, I started my data career in Dunnhumby, and it was just the most beautiful place culturally. Every single person there loved data, and it didn't matter how senior they were, what they did, there was always a data conversation to be had. And even some of our clients there never had a meeting where they'd make a decision without an analyst there. So I do think some of the most junior analysts really know their stuff, and they're just waiting for their stage. And that's one thing that we try and do at WPP. We've created a data and AI community to give some of our more junior people a stage, and it's not just analysts. And I always stress to people, you don't have to be a data scientist or an analyst to be a data literate person, someone who can really tell a great story, inspire people to drive change. So yes, I think start from the top, and then culturally find your data superheroes and give them a stage to inspire everybody would be a couple of tips from me.
Thank you. That's good. And Volker, as I understand it, your role in Arup is effectively a fairly new one. Does that mean the board is listening in Arup? Are they? I know your structure. Perhaps explain the structure of Arup, because I think relevant to this discussion, it could be interesting.
Yeah. So we are employee-owned or sort of employee-owned. That's very too much detail to go through. But we are not a listed company, and we don't have any external shareholders or any debt. We've always operated on the basis of our own controlling our own destiny. And but the key really to the creation of a role was to create a focal point, not a master of all data. So a chief data officer in Arup is a catalyst, not the person who now says this is all the things we need to do with data and how we're going to work with data. And our strategy is called Creativity with Data at Scale. And that brings two things together. The at scale is really where we need to use amazing technology. And for that, you need certain specialists and experts who can handle that. But the creativity is really about the culture of our organization and how our leaders work and how our graduates and apprentices work. And that creates opportunity for everybody to engage with the topic. I do agree with Dai, though, that if the leadership of the company is not engaged, you're not going to make it. And I think it doesn't matter whether you're a startup or a not-for-profit, or I've done quite a few jobs with charities in the past. If the top is not engaged in creating meaning from data, as Dai said, or in our case, actionable insights, then you're not going to create this sort of organization-wide culture to work with data at scale. You just get lots of bottom-up, let thousand flowers bloom prototypes that then don't reach their full potential.
Thank you. Look, we've already got some great questions coming in. I think I'd like to weave one in from Catherine Weller. Can data literacy training run the other way around too? And I think what Catherine's specifically asking is what about teaching? I mean, we've talked a lot about the non-technical skills, but what about teaching data scientists management and strategy skills? I mean, what's the view on that? Dai, give us a perspective.
Oh, I love that. I was freelance a couple of years ago, and one of the training programs I created was trying to make business people and data people make friends and learn how to communicate. And I did it through the means of the Post-it note. I thought, let's go back to basics. And I think it is really important, communication and rapport. And anyone who's done any, studying on how to influence, you need to reach in to communicate with the person who you're trying to communicate with rather than bring them into your sphere. And I think that's often where data people go wrong. They often start at the most technical part of what they've done because they really want to show the depth of their work and their skills, and actually to cut to the chase, I think, and to learn what the motivation is of their audience, I think is a really valuable thing to do.
Yeah, thanks. We've got another question. Oh, sorry, Volker, go ahead.
Actually, I mean, it's such a brilliant question. I think people always assume a data literacy program is technical. The first bit we did before we started any discussion about technical skills was teaching people design thinking and strengthening the approach around the double diamond and the sort of divergence, convergence approach that people need to master in a modern world. Experience design, behavioral psychology. Our economists are currently a critical part of data strategies. So data literacy is not narrowly defined as just the skill of data science and data engineering and cloud technologies. I think then you're doomed.
We've got a question from Mary Black, which I'm going to slightly adapt because I think it's kind of two questions in one. Volker, you talked about some of the talent you've been developing in the organization. You talked about some of the kind of apprentices and master's students. Are these new or existing staff? What's the kind of ratio? You've got an Arup University running inside the organization where you grow and develop talent, but how have you kind of built capability resource-wise? What's the split been?
So our workforce strategy around data has got two angles. One is the upskilling of all our membership, and that means in an engineering company, a civil engineer has always worked with data, but might not have applied machine learning before, or might not have worked in cloud environments. So there are certain technicals they do need to learn, or people have not worked with design thinking, as I previously mentioned. There is a second challenger that you also need to hire. You cannot just self-generate the knowledge you need, And you need to align development with recruitment and run that as an integrated program, I think. Because there are skills gaps that you can't fill fast enough when you're going through a transformation phase. And that's basically what's happening in the built environment right now. So you can't just rely on organic change where the previous digitalization wave around client server technologies, we had 10 years to adapt to, and we could organically grow the skills in the organization. Where this time around, we probably need to make changes in 3 to 5 years. And that means you need to combine skill development and recruitment into one program.
I'm going to switch tack for a second. I've got a really interesting question, I think, from Charlie Murphy, asking, do either of your firms struggle to get the right investment in data? And has an increase in data literacy helped move this in the right direction? Di, tell us. I mean, WPP, massive organisation.
Love this question. So, like Volker, I'm quite new in role. This is a new role. It's never existed before, and I am, like Volker and his team, to be a catalyst for the agency. So, we've just started a data philosophy, and we call it philosophy rather than a strategy because it's an attitude that drives behaviour, and at the heart of it is data variety is our superpower. And that makes our people our superheroes. And we push for investment in people more than investment in data. So largely thanks to the brilliant education programs of ODI, I came into this role really aware of the value of open data, really aware of the data that is around that you can use. So my focus is to democratize as much data as possible. We've got a catalogue. But actually to invest in the skills and the creativity and the sharing. I think sometimes data people can be quite protective over their data source, and that they think the power's in the data. And I've tried to unlock that as a thought, and that the power is in what you do with it, what you blend with it. So I've opened up as much as I can, and then try to invest in the skills more than the data.
Yeah, similar. I think we so it's different for us. We're not building a new P&L around a data function where you need to build a whole organization and sales teams around your data management and your analysis and customer facing services. So that's a different world. But when it's where I think where Di is and where we are around the data capability, you need a minimum viable team to support yourself and to do the planning and to make certain things happen. But the big prize is to change the behavior, for example, our transport business. So transport in Arup is about 600 million in revenue, global, everything from hyperloop technology to high-speed rail to walking and cycling policies around schools and very local projects. So changing our global transport leaders' understanding of what's the art of the possible, and then reaching deep into her organization to drive change and make it more evidence-driven and use new data capabilities is where the big prizes are. And that comes back to literacy and storytelling and winning the right arguments. And then there are probably some bits you need to do around governance and setting out ethics protocols and approaches that do need a bit of a central push. But you're not going to win the game there. You win it, I think, through the literacy and the storytelling.
So there's obviously been an increased lens, a magnification, if you like, on the use of data for obvious reasons in the last 10 to 12 months. We've got a question that talks about, really asks, how much, this is from Jez Cope, I like this question, how much do you feel that data literacy needs to include statistical literacy and similar skills that predate the current concept of data science? I mean, statisticians have been with us well before the digital era, and there's some really critical cornerstones of knowledge. I think of things like standard deviation, other stuff that statisticians learn. Now, how much of what they know needs to be embedded in data literacy, Di?
Oh, well, I think if we go back to my original point about spectrum, I'm going to, sorry to be a bit topical if you might be a bit COVIDed out, but I'm going to use the media reporting and interpretation of COVID data as an example of why some basic data literacy is essential. There's been many errors in how people have displayed it, or deliberate misinterpretation being left open. So I really do would love for pupils to find a way to love maths, to realise that it's a necessary skill, that stats is not awful, that it's really fun, and that computers can do a lot of the work, but that actually to be anybody to be faced with a bar chart and to be able to go, well, you've deliberately played with the scale, you've deliberately made the colours funny so that I can't see what's going on, and that they can interpret the data that's being presented to them at a even a basic level, I think would be a brilliant place to get to.
As an
Volker,
engineering firm, we've got quite a strong relationship with basic truths. So if you design like the Fourth Crossing Bridge into Scotland or the Sydney Opera House, it sort of stands up and works, or it doesn't. So you need to choose the right method to come out with the right answer that needs to then stand the test of time in the world of engineering. Now, where we do policy or strategy work, maybe a bit more room, but culturally, we start by agreeing what is the actionable insight, or what's the design we want to create, and then we choose the method that is most suited towards that. And whether that is a science view or statistician's view, that's then the right course for it. I think where it gets dangerous is when people try to choose the method or choose the data to support an answer they've predetermined. In our world, that doesn't really work, but I think in most areas, it's not really a good idea.
And that actually points well to the question that we had about the use of data responsibly. As we have several minutes left, I'd like to just switch tack for a second. And data literacy in society. I mean, there's how. Di, if you think about this, I mean, from you referenced coming through dunnhumby. People may not know dunnhumby was a kind of pioneer of marketing data analytics in the 90s, I believe, in the early 90s. I mean, you've kind of lived and breathed data, but if you step back for a second and consider others and other sectors, and what needs to happen at the kind of fundamental societal level of education for data literacy to become more embedded and more mainstream for people?
I think people to look at data can be anything. I mean, it can be a collection of images, a collection of words, a collection of colors. People are treating music as data. And when I'm trying to talk to my 10-year-old about data, I try and say there's clues, and that's what data is. It's clues, and you've got to try and find what's being said to you and what you need to do next. And it's a detective job. It's not a data job. So I wouldn't necessarily say that to any of my team, but as a school, I would start with that. And I often, when I do training in schools, I take a bag of shopping and I say, what are you telling the owner of the shop by these things that you buy? And just trying to give an indication of, we do leave a footprint wherever we are, whatever we do, someone that's telling somebody something about us. And just to think about it from that side without getting bogged down in what the data is. It's just what it's used for and why it might be important.
Yeah, thank you. Volker, what do you outside of Arup, what do you see to happen?
I think if we look 3, 5, several years forward, a modern enterprise needs to be able to combine three things. I call it triple helix. They need to be inclusive. They need to be genuinely committed to sustainability and deal with megatrends like climate change, and they need to be able to work with data at scale. And if you can't do all three really well, you're probably not a modern business, or you don't meet your potential in terms of the needs of society. And I think therefore they are the three literacies we need to teach wherever, so people can properly engage with that. In fact, in recruitment right now, that is probably our main differentiator. So we are generally committed to all three, and that draws people into Arup. So we are now seeing it the other way, that people who've been through education, who thought about these topics, they are looking for companies who can offer them jobs and an environment where all three things, inclusion, sustainability, and creativity with data, are sort of equal parts of this triple helix.
Thank you. I think that actually addresses some other questions that were coming in around kind of attracting talent. What do you need to do as an organization to attract talent? As we draw to a close, I'd like to kind of unify a cluster of questions that came in, really asking around how firms ensuring that ethical and responsible approaches to data are being embedded in their work. I know that speaking here with Arup and with WPP, that there's been some adoption and use of the Open Data Institute's Data Ethics Canvas. It's a free tool available along with other free tools that we offer to help organizations navigate and address some of these questions. I think there's a whole separate debate that could and should happen about the responsible and ethical use of data, and it's been raised many times today. And I look forward to helping convene that debate both in business and society, and trying to make it more progressive. On behalf of the Open Data Institute, thanks for tuning in today, and thank you very much, Di and Volker, for joining us.
Thank you.